That's perfect. So I think we'll go ahead and get started because I want to respect everybody's time. And if anybody else comes in, Kyla or Tammy, if either of you could just pop them in, that would be great. And we will go ahead and start. So thanks everybody for joining. Again, I'm excited for this. One of my goals this year is to do monthly live trainings and see what's helpful for people. I work a lot with men. So I've been doing a lot of presentations for men, but I want to open it up because my actual practice, I work a lot with women and couples as well. So I'm going to go ahead and share. And everybody can see my shameful number of tabs that I have open. This is like how I organize my life, is through tabs on my computer. It's a very sophisticated system. So here we go. So welcome to Mental Mastery for Leaders. And this presentation is going to have a really simple, but not necessarily always easy, 3-step tool that I tell people, which I know is a bold statement, can bring your stress level from a 300 to a 30 instantly. Probably not right away, but it's something you can start using today to help you become more stress resilient and trigger proof, and help you tap into more creative thinking and critical thinking when things around you are a little bit chaotic or busy or stressful, which I think a lot of us can relate to in today's climate. So, like I said, this really, if you apply this and you really, truly implement this in your life, this can help you instantly reduce stress. It will vastly improve your relationships. You really can achieve larger goals with less effort. You'll have more joy and creativity because stress requires a lot of energy. Stress is very draining on our energy. It's also, I put this one in, I thought it was funny, makes you less likely to act like a jerk. Because when we're not questioning our thoughts, or we're not in what I'll explain as metacognition, we're more likely to behave or act from a state of stress or negative bias, which means our behavior is going to be less aligned with our most adorable, aligned potential. And you'll have more confidence and energy. And I often tell people, either you master your mind or your mind is mastering you all the time. And either you train your brain or your brain is training you. And I say this a lot. Here's a quote of me, myself, giving my own quote, which is a bit of a vibe. But I truly believe that untrue thoughts are the greatest cause of stress and also the gateway to your absolute best life. And how I became interested in the study of thoughts and human behavior is actually has been a part of my life for a long time. I was born with ADHD and a form of autism called Asperger's. That's the same type Elon Musk has. So what that tends to mean is that we have vast gifts. I was doing university level physics at 8 years old, but really what it meant for me was that my special interest, as they say, since I was 4 years old, was human beings and human behavior. So I often tell people I've been studying human behavior since I was 4 to survive. I experienced a lot of bullying. I had extremely high anxiety levels. And in adulthood, that translated into a lot of perfectionism, really high achieving, but often at my own expense. So I had high anxiety levels. I had imposter syndrome. I was a perfectionist, and I ended up experiencing a rather severe burnout. I also have a genetic condition I was born with that has made me intrinsically incentivized to really learn how to optimize human health so that I can thrive, which I do. And what this burnout taught me, again, made me intrinsically incentivized to really figure a lot of things out because it wasn't working. And I just wanted to have more fun and suffer and struggle less. So I moved out into the country. I lived on a beautiful acreage in the middle of the foothills of the Canadian Rockies for 7 years. And I spent 2 years almost virtually in silent meditation. I didn't interact much with other people. I was practicing. I went from a very sort of busy, chaotic life, running 3 companies. I had my own businesses, to really grounding into nature, spending time by myself. And then I spent 4 years trying to figure out, I guess, sort of a blueprint for human mastery. And one of the models, one of my superpowers is taking a lot of information and whittling it down into simple metaphors that allow us to experience rapid, sustainable results much more quickly. I like things to be practical. I'm very to the point, and I want results and I want them now because I want to spend more time having fun. So one of the models that I created during this time that I use now, as I guess I should mention that, I'm a life strategist, which is a fancy word for life coach. I'm certified in almost 30 modalities, and I work sometimes with teams in a corporate environment, but I work a lot with individuals, men a lot. I have a podcast called the Magnetic Masculinity Podcast. And I also work with high performers and high performing couples to help them bridge that gap between achievement and fulfillment. And I've worked with clients in 9 countries. I love what I do. If I had $1 billion in the bank, I would do exactly what I'm doing now. I would just hire more people so that I could reach more people more quickly. And so you may have heard terms like mind, body, spirit, maybe at a yoga class. And one of the models that I created was helping us to adopt what I call a more multidimensional approach to our life so that we can thrive in all areas. Because often what I notice with the high performers that I work with is they're going to the right seminars, they're reading the right books, they're trying the right things, but they still feel like something is missing, or that they're not experiencing the best results that they could, or that they're missing out on their most magnetic, delicious, amazing, fulfilling, exciting, rewarding life. So the way I've broken it down for people to help you understand is I call your body your vehicle of consciousness. And to break this down into a more multidimensional model, to help us more quickly diagnose and repair when something is going wrong in our life. And I've used the metaphor of a vehicle because it's something we can all relate to, and I really like cars. So if you imagine that your vehicle, your body that you are living in right now is your vehicle of consciousness, you want to be piloting or driving that vehicle of consciousness on a path of your most authentic alignment. And what I mean by that is you want to be able to assess all the different areas of your life and your relationships and your career to see if they are in alignment with what your authentic wants, needs, boundaries, and values are. And just so everybody knows, there will be a recording of this. My former assistant said I'm a little bit like taking a sip from a fire hose. So I'm definitely going to have AI take notes. One of my associates is here taking notes, and we will also send you a recording of this. So if you don't prefer taking notes, that will be available for you. And at the end, we'll also have a handout that has a lot of this stuff in it, including our Socratic questions that we'll go into later. So in this vehicle of consciousness, we want to make sure that you're driving it on your path of your most authentic alignment to the life that is actually aligned with what's going to light you up rather than who you think you should be. And so we're going to break our body or our mind or our spirit down into these very simple, different metaphors so that we can have metaphorical alignment. So your brain is like the supercomputer of the vehicle, and all the different systems in that vehicle rely on that supercomputer, that brain. And that brain has a lot of different software that goes into it. Now, we know from neuroscience and human behavior studies that most of that software is installed before the age of 7 years old. So most of the programs that you're running are kind of an outdated version. This would never fly if we had software like this on our computer. Yet the most important computer, our interface to consciousness, the brain, we're often just letting it run this old outdated software. And it's often said that 90 to 95% of your perceptual awareness, the thoughts you think, the words you speak, the choices you make, the behaviors you experience, or the patterns you experience, and the behaviors you choose are based on this subconscious programming, most of which is before the age of 7. Suboptimal, in my opinion. Now, the computer, all of these systems can be looked at as independent units, but they all are required to run the vehicle perfectly. So they work together, but I like to be able to separate them and then look how they work together, because no amount of one certain self-help tool or no amount of mindset work is going to help you with your burnout necessarily. And no amount of mindset work or going to the gym is going to help you open your heart battery. So it's looking at the right tool for the right job. And when we're feeling like something's not working or we're super stressed, it's being able to break down. It's being able to, it's a model for our minds to be able to break it down and think more clearly about what's wrong and how to fix it as quickly as possible. Like I said, I like results quick. So your brain, the supercomputer and software, your body is the engine, and we want that body to have the right amount of fluids, proper maintenance, and a full tank of gas, preferably really premium fuel, especially for people like me with ADHD, because we're like a Porsche. We're like the sports cars I like to drive. And those engines prefer a much more premium fuel than a typical engine. And a lot of my clients are also high performers, CEOs, PhDs, millionaires, entrepreneurs, thought leaders, game changers, Mensa members, and they need premium fuel in order to be able to complete all the things that they're expecting themselves to do in a day. So we want to make sure we have that full tank of gas with premium fuel, the right fluids, proper maintenance for whatever type of vehicle you are. But even if the computer's working perfectly, which I guarantee you it's not, and you have the engine running perfectly with premium fuel, lots of energy to complete all the things you want to do in your personal and professional life, without the battery, the vehicle's not going anywhere, and your heart is the battery. And I often tell people we're living in the emotional dark ages, or we're evolving out of the emotional dark ages, if we put a positive spin. And a lot of us have had to disconnect that battery, that way that we connect to everything around us and everybody else around us in order to survive. So we want to be able to look at getting our heart back online. And are we in alignment with what's going to really fill our soul? And that's that bridging that gap between achievement and fulfillment. And emotions, a lot of us don't prefer to talk about, but I love talking about them. Emotions are our navigation system. And they were designed to help us determine whether we are on the path to what is going to fulfill us personally, professionally, emotionally, physically, as well as where our wounds are and where our sore spots are, or where our blind spots are, as we would call it in corporate coaching. And when we suppress our emotions, or that emotional navigation system goes offline, we're missing out on the super important, helpful, valuable information that those emotions have to make sure that we're navigating that vehicle of consciousness to our true north. So the tool that we're going to look at today is one of the many tools, but in my opinion, the most profound tool we use when we're looking specifically at the system of the brain. And we're going to start with thoughts. And there's a few numbers here. So 6,000 is the number of thoughts that you think a day. When I first started taking coaching modalities and neuroscience coaching, it was believed that it was 60,000. The new number is 60,000. I haven't personally counted them, but we think it's somewhere around there. Anyways, it's a lot of thoughts that you think in a day. And remember what I said, 90 to 95% of them are subconscious. They're below the level of your awareness. So you might be acting on thoughts that aren't even true. And 80% of the thoughts that we think are negative biased. Now, I recently had a NASA physicist who's doing some studies on human behavior as well on my podcast. And he and I were discussing that this was probably a very helpful evolutionary strategy, that our brain would focus on the negative. That might be one of the reasons that we survived as a species. But just knowing that can help you sort of understand or navigate that vehicle of consciousness and learn to reprogram that computer. We want to remove any old software that no longer serves you. We want to be able to give some of it just a little bit of an OS update. And we want to learn how to reprogram it with thoughts, ideas, and beliefs that support your most magnetic life so that you become more stress resilient, trigger proof. I went through the whole pandemic without, I don't think, getting upset or triggered once. I moved to a new country this year. I changed my company direction about 3 times, started a podcast, got married, and virtually nothing affects me. And remember, I used to be extremely anxious and experienced full burnout from overperforming and overachieving and trying to people please and all the things, perfectionism. So why is this important? Well, when we're looking at that brain, that supercomputer, I say this with a lot of love. I love my brain, but your brain is a bit of a lazy liar. And what I mean by that is that I do have a client who's a neuroscientist. So if anybody else here is in that field, I acknowledge that I'm grossly oversimplifying neuroscience for the sake of metaphorical alignment. But your brain's job is to seek pleasure. You might notice that sometimes you find yourself reaching over and over again for things that you know aren't necessarily in your highest good or most aligned for you. And there's nothing wrong with this. I'm a firm believer that we should get our needs met and that we should live in joy and abundance and fun and fulfillment. But when we're not aware of this, this is why we tend to go, the brain wants to go for things that it likes, whether those are good for us or not. It also wants to avoid pain. Now, why this can be a problem, this can be very helpful because I think avoiding pain is a great strategy. But often the brain tries to avoid pain, what it perceives as pain, which can be the expansion of growth or change. Because the other thing our brains love, these supercomputers in our vehicle of consciousness, is repetition and efficiency. Electricity takes the path of least resistance, the same as it does in your house. And like a computer, like an algorithm, it prioritizes what is familiar. And remember that most of that familiar software was installed before the age of 7 years old in a climate, in a population that I would say for most of us was maybe not the most optimal, since we're currently evolving out of the emotional dark ages. So this is helpful to know because, like I said, either you train your brain or your brain is training you. You program your brain or it's going to be running these old, outdated programs that have nothing to do with you, who you are, nothing to do with what's going to make you happy, and nothing to do with your authentic self and highest potential. So they also say that 80% of the thoughts you think are not true. So please, if you take nothing else away from this workshop, don't believe everything you think. And remember that you have that 80% negative bias. So when your mind is telling you, this is bad, everything's falling apart, you can remember, oh, this is okay. This is just an evolutionary strategy of my brain. And probably things are not as dire as they seem. Now, the other job of your brain is it is an interface for your thoughts. So that computer translates your thoughts. So you think a thought like, nobody likes me. So you think a thought, nobody likes me, or your mind thinks a thought, nobody likes me. And because it's below the level of your awareness, you believe it. You go, oh, nobody likes me, that sucks. Your brain says, okay, nobody likes you. Here's the formula. And it's going to send a signal into your body and your nervous system, 3 parts cortisol, 1 part adrenaline. And it's going to make you feel in your body the effect of that thought. Whereas if you think a thought, I'm really well supported and everybody really likes me, you're going to feel completely differently. And your brain is constantly responding as that interface for your thoughts in your vehicle of consciousness. So let's take this to an example with a client I worked with. And then we're going to go through the 3-step program. We're going to tie all this together. And I find storytelling a really easy way to do that. So the situation, this man was a very successful real estate investor, and he was referred to me through another client. And when he came to me, he had millions of dollars of capital tied up in some warehouses he had purchased. He owned a couple of businesses. He had been unsuccessful in selling one of the businesses and unsuccessful in selling two of these buildings. So he was spending tens of thousands of dollars a month in overhead and had millions tied up in capital and had been unsuccessful in selling the business. That is valid stress. So I'm not saying that this three-step process is going to eliminate stress in your environment, but what I'm telling you is that it will help you become stress resilient and trigger-proof like me, like I am now, most of the time. So that is, albeit a stressful situation. His symptoms to this stressful situation were he was drinking more than usual. His wife and children weren't speaking to him all that much. They were very agitated with his behavior. His kids weren't really talking to him very much. A couple of his employees quit because he became very short-tempered. He had hypertension. His doctor was worried that he was going to have burnout. He was getting headaches, back pain, and he wasn't sleeping well. And all of that's really valid, right? So that's our story. Now we're going to look at this three-step process. We're going to walk through what I did with him and how he completely shifted all this using this three-step process. And that is awareness, questioning, and redirection. That's your three steps. Dora, you're going to get all this in a handout at the end, including our magic questions. So the first step, awareness. A fancy word for this is metacognition, and that is the ability to zoom out from that subconscious program we talked about, that you're not really piloting your vehicle of consciousness when it's subconscious, because you're just kind of being taken on a ride from the software that was installed before the age of 7 when your brain was in a theta state. So this metacognition is the ability to zoom out and observe the thoughts. A lot of people might call this mindfulness, awareness, or present moment thinking. I use the word metacognition. And the most important thing to train your brain over time to be in a state of awareness, mindfulness, present moment thinking, metacognition, or clarity is every time you notice a thought, or notice, even if it's like a terrible, intrusive nonsense thought, whatever it is, you want to celebrate the awareness. That's part of how we train our brain. Our brain's like a dog, and you give it a little reward. Oh, good job. You looked at that. You noticed that. And the brain, because it seeks pleasure and wants to avoid pain, is going to start to seek. Oh, look, here you go, Sandy. Look, you're thinking this thought. I'm like, wow, good job. And I feel really good in my body. And I get that nice emotional response. Look, and I'm amazing. I'm in awareness. And over time, that's going to train your brain to spend more time in awareness or metacognition, which is the most important step in any of this, and in almost any tool that I use for mind mastery. And I acknowledge that probably not all of you have years to spend sitting out in a forest meditating in silence and devoting, I don't have children, I don't have a Netflix account, I didn't even have a cell phone, I had a landline installed in my house, and literally, and I spent thousands and thousands of hours on these things. So you may not have time to do that, but you won't have to, because I'm going to help you bridge that gap. So awareness. Second one, another fun word, Socratic questioning. Now, Socratic questioning is simply a term that was given to help us bring ourselves out of the subconscious programs, out of the fear, out of the stress, into more critical thinking. Because our brain is just going to go do what it does, and it's going to start trying to run old patterns and old software, and we're trying to create new neural pathways. So Socratic questioning can help us bridge that gap between the subconscious and that state of awareness or metacognition. So we're in awareness, we're like, okay, here's the thoughts I'm thinking. And then at the end of this, in an email, you'll get the list of Socratic questions, which we will also go through in our 2 case study examples to help bring all of this together. So step 2 is Socratic questioning. It's the ability to question your thoughts so that you can decide if those programs, if those thoughts are part of that 80% negative bias, part of that 80% untrue thoughts, or if the thoughts are helpful before your brain interfaces with them and sends stress signals into your body that are going to actually deplete your energy, make you more of a jerk, or make you more sad, and less able to handle stress, which all of us have a lot of on a daily basis, probably. And then we're going to redirect the thoughts. And this is reprogramming. And we're going to make a conscious choice to think differently over and over and over as many times as it takes until that becomes our new subconscious baseline, our new subconscious programming. Because the exciting news is you can reprogram new software that will run as effortlessly as the old ones did, except you're going to choose which software is helpful for you. I think that's pretty good ROI of our time. So back to our example, my real estate investor, family upset, stress, physical problems with his health, like really getting quite sick, drinking too much, couldn't handle the stress. His employees were quitting, and he had spent months and months and months unable, stuck in these thought loops, unable to sell the building. So when he came to me, I said to him, okay, for your first week, your assignment is to go home and write down all your thoughts for a week. Anytime you guys told him this process, and I said, I need you to just write down your thoughts anytime you can notice them. And he was like, you came very highly recommended, but this is nonsense. My thoughts are not the problem. Didn't you hear me? This is millions of dollars we're talking about. And I was like, yep, I heard you. And if this doesn't work, I'll give you your money back. He said, okay. So when he came back to me the next week and he had his list of thoughts, some of his thoughts were, this is a nightmare. And I said, how many times do you think that? He said, about probably 50 to 100 times a day. This is a nightmare. I'm going to be ruined. Nobody's ever going to buy this building. My employees hate me. Everybody betrays me. My family is disappointed in me. Think about for a minute. Remember we said that the brain is the interface to your thoughts. Think in your body. So if you say to your brain, if you think a thought, an automatic negative thought, ants as they often call them, like this is a nightmare, and you think that 200 times a day, or 100 times or 50 or 20, every time you think this is a nightmare, your brain says, okay, boss, that's fine. This is a nightmare. I believe you. Doesn't question it until you train it to. And then it says, okay, if this is a nightmare, we're going to use 60 parts cortisol. That's not a real, I'm just making up numbers, but we're going to put in 60 units of cortisol. We're going to put in 20 units of adrenaline, and we're going to cut off all oxytocin and cut off all dopamine, or cut off any of our feel-good chemicals, because this is an emergency. Now his body gets flooded. His body gets flooded with cortisol, and his critical thinking almost goes away, and his emotional navigation system goes offline, goes haywire. He probably judges and suppresses his emotions. And then he thinks thoughts like, my family's disappointed in me. I'm a failure. There goes the heart battery, drained. So is it stressful to have millions of dollars tied up in capital, tens of thousands of dollars of overhead, and not able to sell a business that you really want nothing to do with anymore? That's really stressful. But if we called that 30 units of stress, how many units of stress is it to think I'm ruined? This is a nightmare. And guess what? None of those things are true. Those are just different reactions. Another example of this would be, say you have two people sitting outside together and a bee flies by. If a bee flies by, I'm like, oh my God, it's a bee. I love bees. Pollinators are so cute. And I like when they get pollen and their butts little get fuzzy and they go in a flower. And the person beside me might have had a different historical or experience where they got stung by a bee and had to go to a hospital. And they might have a completely different reaction to that bee. So is it the bee that's the problem, the stressor, or is it our reaction and thoughts to it? Right? So those thoughts he was having were debilitating. They were sucking up his energy. His whole body was in fight or flight continuously. He was disconnected. And the thing is, when we believe those thoughts and our body feels that amount of stress, it impacts our behavior and choices. So he was showing up. He was being a bit more of a jerk. He was suffering. and he was short-tempered, and he wasn't creative. He wasn't critical thinking, and he wasn't creative problem solving. Or if you're a little more esoteric, he was not doing a very good job manifesting the outcome he preferred. So we started questioning his thoughts. And again, you'll get these Socratic questions at the end. We asked him things like, are these thoughts true? He's like, yeah, definitely. And his brain was like, yes, because the brain will always find evidence of what it believes based on its old outdated software. And I was like, what opposite thoughts could be true? If your best friend or your child or somebody you really respected had this happening to them, would you say to them, well, this is a nightmare. It's because you're a loser. I bet your family is disgusted with you. It's never going to sell. You're toast. Like, would you ever say that to somebody you really cared about? No. So we started going through the Socratic questioning to start bringing him out of the subconscious software, 80% negative bias, and into a more empowered metacognitive state where he could start applying Socratic questionings. Then we started redirecting the thoughts. So I'm going to list thoughts, not just positive affirmations that nobody's going to believe when they're in that stressful situation, but equally true to the thoughts that were causing him his stress to go to a 300. What about other thoughts like, I'm so amazing that I bought a building worth several $1,000,000 and started 3 companies. I've gotten through 100% of the stressors that have happened to me in my life. It's okay to make mistakes. Now he was like, I can't imagine the building selling yet because I'm so mad and it hasn't happened. We've had 9 buyers go through, but I was like, okay, that's fine. What would you like to do? Let's imagine it did sell. What would you like to do? He's like, well, I'm going to buy a sailboat and I'm going to take my wife sailing for 6 months. That's fun. So we started focusing on what will you do when that sells? Then we started looking at, who do you think would like to buy this building? Who do you think would be really good here? So we started thinking, wow, it would be really exciting if somebody who had this big dream of what they wanted to do with their life and this company that they wanted to start, what if this was the perfect building for them? How could we market that to them? So we started shifting. And even though the building still hadn't sold, instantly, over about a week, we were able to completely reprogram how he was experiencing that stress. It's okay to make mistakes. I'm really successful. I've come through things before. My family is proud of me. You know, this is an annoying situation. We're not going to deny that, but we're not going to say this is a nightmare to ourselves over and over again. So it's this, I know this 3-step process seems so simple, but I can't express how profound it can be and how much not doing this sort of thing is impacting us on a daily basis without our awareness. So as a result, the building sold within 3 weeks. We got really creative with how we were going to market it and found that really like soul-aligned client that was so excited to buy it. He was happier. He was healthier because he wasn't making all of these binge eating choices as much. He was treating himself like a friend who was going through a hard time, drinking more water, eating a bit more fruits and vegetables, and not drinking quite so much after work. He had more energy because thoughts like, this is a nightmare, I'm going to be ruined, nobody's ever going to buy this building, I'm a failure as a man, my family's disappointed in me. You want to know what drains the gas tank in your vehicle of consciousness faster than that? Not much. So it lowered his stress level even before the situation changed. And he was able to connect to more insight and clarity because he wasn't using all of his energy stuck in these negative thought loops. So we're going to do another one. Our second example, another man who came to me from Europe who was considering divorce. He was very unhappy. He was very successful. He had a PhD, very successful career, but he wasn't fulfilled. He didn't feel happy. He had experienced complete burnout. Like he had to take 3 months off of work. He was in complete burnout. And we started looking at the areas of his life. And I said, what is the thing that is most upsetting to you? And he said that it was his relationship with his wife and he was considering divorce. And I said, well, why? And he said, well, my wife doesn't appreciate me. And I was like, that is upsetting. And it might be true. I mean, you might be married to somebody who doesn't appreciate you. That's a totally different scenario. So my wife doesn't appreciate me. My kids don't appreciate me. My family doesn't care about my work. So we started talking about the situation. And what happened is every day for 20 years or so, he came home from work 8, 9, or 10 o'clock, maybe 7. And his wife never asked him how his day was, didn't ask him about the people he worked with, never mentioned his work. But when we dove into it, so he thought my wife doesn't appreciate me, nobody cares about me, what I do is not important. And he believed that every day for 20 years. He didn't speak to her about it, which was a whole separate relationship coaching journey that we went on. But when we were able to use Socratic questioning and really dig in, from her perspective, she took care of the kids all day in the home all day because she appreciated how hard he worked. And we discovered that he was telling me, I said, tell me about the day. Tell me what happens when you come home. He's like, she feeds the kids, puts them to bed. I come home, she eats with me. Oh, wait, what? She eats with you? Yeah. So she eats with you when you get home. Yeah. Why don't you think she appreciates you? Because she never asks me about work. So I said to him, I need you to go home and ask her why she never asks you about work. And this was before I worked with both of them. I said, I need you to ask her. And apparently in her childhood, some of her programming or software, her subconscious software before the age of 7 was that her father was a very successful entrepreneur. And he would fly off the handle if anybody talked to him about work. He didn't want to talk about work with his family. And if they mentioned work, they would get in big trouble. And he would say, you don't understand anything. This is none of your business. So she never asked about his work. But he thought those thoughts, she doesn't believe me, or she doesn't appreciate me. And because he had that belief, his brain found evidence of that over and over and over. And that caused his suffering, caused him to disconnect from her, right? So then his heart battery got drained, her heart battery got drained. He felt lifeless, he felt uninspired, he felt unappreciated. And again, I'm not saying this is never true. Maybe it could be true, but in this case, it actually wasn't. So we were able to change that to, my wife really appreciates me. My family loves me. My wife tried to avoid causing stress. She does all of this stuff because she adores me. She cherishes me. So think how different that feels in your body, how instantly that lowers your stress and helps your relationship to think, my partner adores me. My partner adores me versus my partner doesn't appreciate me. Nobody likes me. I'm not good enough, whatever it is that our automatic negative thoughts are telling us, right? So anyways, so that's 2 examples of how we can apply that simple 3-step process to lower our stress from a 300 to a 30 instantly. And over time, you will spend more time in awareness and able to observe your thoughts and sort of question them. And you'll notice nonsense thoughts. We all have sort of, I call them nonsense thoughts or intrusive thoughts. We all have thoughts. Doesn't matter. Thoughts are unimportant unless you believe them. So you might have thoughts like, I had a client tell me once, I think I'm a terrible person. He said, I was driving to work and this guy cut me off, gave me the finger. And then we were at the stoplight and I thought, I hope that stoplight falls on his car. And he's like, am I going to make that happen to him? Or like, does that mean I'm a bad person? I'm like, no. Did you act on the thought? No. Other than that, it's just a thought. It's just a thought. Thoughts are nothing. They're like a choice. They're like a buffet. You can choose to eat it or you don't have to. But if we're aware that 80% of them are negative and that 95% of them are subconscious and that we're acting, making choices, speaking words based on outdated software that's draining our battery, our heart battery, not necessarily listening to the wisdom of our emotional navigation system. Again, I'm going to do monthly trainings and there's lots of tools in all those areas. but this is just sort of helping you start to understand that model and be able to more effectively diagnose and repair when something in your life doesn't feel completely delicious and fulfilling. And so you are going to be receiving an email after our Q&A session, if anybody has any questions, that will have the Socratic questions. It'll have this process in it, as well as the notes and the replay. And the other thing you will get is a link that allows you to book a life diagnostic with me, where we go through your vehicle of consciousness thoroughly. I send you a workbook, and whether you're looking for corporate workshops, training, personal development, this session through this link, if you use this link, would be free, and you get to spend that hour with me where we go through the workbook, we diagnose everything in it. And if we decide that we're a good fit to work together, great. But even if we don't, that's great too, because we're going to get to know each other more. We're going to look at what's running well in your life, and I'm going to create your sort of unique magnetic life blueprint. And this is a strategy session feedback from a client I worked with last year. And it says, never before has my life and perspective been as profoundly impacted as it was in the hour I spent with Sandy. With the most basic questions, she was able to get at the heart of what was holding me back, both personally and professionally. She was able to help me see clearly on a decision I was struggling with professionally. I felt lighter than I had in years after talking to her for 1 hour. Her energy and passion and excitement are infectious, even through a screen in the virtual environment. And I love receiving feedback like that. It makes me feel good. And it's just, like I said, I love what I do. And this is just feedback from somebody that I did one of these sessions with. So again, just so you know, you'll be checking your email in the next day or so. You'll have a link to the replay, the Socratic Questioning handout, the process so that you can start to retrain that software of the brain, as well as the link to book your free life diagnostic and strategy session. And I would like to open it up if anybody has any questions. Kyla, could you manage unmuting anybody if they need it? You could also pop questions in the comments if you prefer. I'm going to open the chat in case. And chances are, if you have a question, somebody else has that question. Thank you, Rob. I appreciate that feedback very much. I love working with men. I love working with women. I love working with couples. And from Kendra, have you ever worked with children? I have. What I prefer to do is to work with the parents to work with their children. That's sort of my favorite way. I tend to work a lot with high performers. I've done a lot of volunteer work with children. I used to volunteer almost 30 hours a week at a home for children who were had very rough starts to life. So yeah, I will work with children, but I always prefer to work with the parents to work with their children, if that makes sense. Yeah. And authentic alignment. Yes, absolutely. So authentic alignment is what would actually light our soul on fire. So one of the things I help people clarify, and this is something when I work with individuals, companies, or couples, and I say, tell me what your authentic wants, needs, boundaries, and values are. And they go, I don't really know. I say, okay, well then how can you possibly assess your leisure activities, your career, your relationship? How can you possibly assess if your life is what you want it to be if you don't actually know what it is you truly desire? Or in relationships, what are your authentic wants, needs, boundaries, and values? People say, I don't know. And I'm like, well, then it's not very helpful or fair to expect your partner to meet needs that you yourself don't know, or maybe are not articulating to them, as in the example of our second case study of a man I worked with who did not express to his wife, I really need to be told I'm appreciated, and when I come home from work, I want this or that. We expect our partners to be mind readers. Another way to look at authentic alignment would be say that I had grown up in a family where I was expected to be an accountant, and I had an arranged marriage where I was expected to have lots of children. That would not be authentically aligned for me. I chose not to have children consciously. I love work. I love what I do. Like I said, I've been studying human behavior since I was 4 years old to survive. I love it. I love it. I read 40 books a year. I love this. I love what I do. And so it doesn't matter if you're not in authentic alignment with who you are and what lights you up. No amount of self-help, mindset work, emotional work, taking your inner child on a date, none of that is going to work. You're going to do all the right things, say all the right things, read the right books, attend the right seminars. But if you're not in authentic alignment, it doesn't matter. And our emotional navigation system is what pilots us and tells us, navigates us and tells us what is authentically aligned for me. Where are my wounds? What are my blind spots? What are my barriers? And when we suppress that emotional navigation system, which most of us have, especially men, and ladies, we're partially responsible. We raised men, so we're all in this together. But in childhood, we basically cut off men's emotional legs. Then we put them in relationships and business, and we're like, well, what's wrong with you? Why can't you walk up the stairs? Well, because they've had their emotional navigation systems shut down. So they don't know how to necessarily pilot effectively or learn how to, and that's also another energy drain when I work with clients. So it's looking at, is what I'm doing, are the areas in life, what are my authentic wants, needs, boundaries, and values? Authentic, not who I was told to be a good enough woman or a good enough man, but what actually is going to light my soul on fire? What's actually going to make me see fulfilled? So yeah, that's your authentic alignment. And our emotional navigation system and that heart battery are very important to help us understand that, which is why one of the things I do when I work with people is help them really develop emotional mastery so that we understand the priceless information that our emotions contain for us. Thank you. Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. I would love to see that. I wish I had attended this session with my wife. Well, I will send it to you, and you can absolutely share it with your wife. And people can take advantage of the strategy session either with their spouse or on their own. It's completely up to you. And yeah, any other questions before we end? Wait, I just saw something pop up and then it disappeared. Kyla, you have one that was sent? There is. What does normal engagement look like? Weekly sessions, monthly? So it depends whether I'm working with an individual or a team or a whole company. I sometimes do workshops. I do custom workshops. I do speaking events like this for companies. And I have a couple of clients here, actually, I see. And I do whatever works for them. So I believe that my clients are smart enough to know what cadence works for them, whether that's weekly, monthly. Some people like a lot of time for integration. I record sessions, so a lot of people like to take notes between them and sort of reflect and take time for integration. And some people like to just jump in and go. So, and some people hire me for a one-off. Like I have a client that is a real estate developer, different one than in our example in Boston. And every time he's going to buy a new property, he calls me and we do am I making this decision from the right mindset? So I sometimes do one-offs, or I also do, some people want, in the case of our second case study, somebody who wants like a full year complete life makeover. I want to lose weight. I want to find my authentic alignment. I want to change habits. I want to improve my relationship. I want to reprogram my mind. I want to optimize. I want to take my company to the next level. I want to double my income. I want to, whatever it is, then they tend to go for a longer engagement. So it's really bespoke. We're all individuals, right? So one of my superpowers as a life strategist is the flexibility to be able to figure out, again, through a diagnostic, what's going to be best for you, because you're different than everybody else. And that's why I like to have a lot of different tools to draw from so that I can provide the right tools for the right job for the right person. And yes, I do work with couples. I work a lot with couples. So I love working with couples. And in my Magnetic Masculinity podcast for men, we've just finished a section that is specifically for relationships. So I do a lot of conscious living coaching, conscious relationship coaching. Typically, what people come to me for is either health, wealth, or relationships. And I'm also a certified business coach, so I have the flexibility to be able to help people on many different levels as a life strategist. And if I don't know something, I'll go find it out, or I'll make a recommendation, or yeah. But I really enjoy working with couples. Anybody else? Rob, that's a great question. I have two of my associates here. Austra, can you pop on and just pop in the comments and say if my podcast is pinged to my profile or website? If it's not, I'll make sure it's emailed to you in the link that we're going to be sending with the free strategy session link, as well as the Socratic Questioning. And it is called the Magnetic Masculinity Podcast, and it's available on YouTube, Spotify, Amazon, all the usual suspects. But it's not easy to find because we're just learning about SEO, and all of that right now is not my forte. Even though I work with lots of men in tech, I don't have that skill myself. So, but I'll make sure that we get it to you. And phenomenal presentation. Oh, thank you, Diane. And have you ever worked with partners, co-presenters? I have, sometimes. Yeah, I have in the past. I've done, when I do workshops, I often call in other people with different modalities. So when I do either in-person or virtual workshops, I've often worked with other people. Or if I go into a company and I work with 5 or 6 people, or I work with an entire C-suite team, often we will have more than one person. It's there on LinkedIn. It's the number 1. Oh, thank you. That's very helpful, Rob. Thank you. You found one of my weak spots. That is not my forte. Yeah, and it's going to be really exciting. I'm starting a series with a former NASA physicist named Tom Campbell, who's one of the forefront leaders in the unification of science and consciousness. And we're talking about sort of the history of the divine masculine and the divine feminine, and where femininity is going and where masculinity is going, and how we can all work together to support each other, to heal and grow and evolve and work together in more helpful ways than we have in the past historically. So yeah. Anybody else? That's it. And yeah, thank you, everybody. I appreciate all of you. Anybody that wants to message me privately, you can. Thank you, Boris. Thank you, Russ. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Kendra. I appreciate all of you very much. And I will be doing monthly live trainings, different subjects. So I have one coming up for neurodivergent executives, ADHD entrepreneurs and executives, because a lot of us ADHDers end up in as CEOs, entrepreneurs, C-suite, thought leaders, game changers. I'm also doing one on the magnetic masculinity blueprint, on the feminine expansion blueprint, and I don't know, a lot of them on blind spot integration and all kinds of things. So they'll be really fun, I hope. So thank you so much, everybody. I really appreciate all of you. And have a great night. Bye for now.